Anyway, thank you, Mary. Appreciate the introduction. And I always get a little nervous in the fall when Mary approaches me because usually she's going to ask me to speak at these things. So, but this time when she asked me, I was truly elated because although I'm not an expert on ferns, I love ferns. And I just thought, what a great opportunity for me to do a little more deeper dive into our native ferns and learn a little bit more. And then, you know, the joy of coming up and public speaking too, right? So thank you, Mary. And if you don't mind, it'll help me out if you hold your questions till the end, and that will help me out. So appreciate if you can do that. And so what I hope to accomplish today are a few things. So I want to provide you with just enough information that you learn something today, but that you also, you know, maybe I whet your appetite and you'll go and do a deeper dive of your own and do some research and find out more about our lovely native ferns. I'm going to go into a little bit of the nomenclature that you're going to run into if you are identifying some of the ferns that we have here locally, just so that you get familiar with that nomenclature and don't you know, get discouraged. I will talk about 6 of the natives that we have in this area particularly. There are more, but I don't have much time, so I've narrowed it down to 6. And then hopefully through this discussion, I'll lay some of the foundation that you'll need in order to potentially incorporate some of these natives into your own landscape. House plants too, but more of your landscape. All right, so starting very broadly, we have the plant kingdom. And we've got plants that on this side reproduce with flowers, as Mary touched on, and cones, which make seeds. And then we have plants that do not have those abilities. They have roots and stems and leaves, but they don't have seeds to reproduce. So you guys probably know, though, how do ferns reproduce? Anybody? Spores, right? Or a fancy word called sporangium. And in order to reproduce, those spores rely heavily on water or wet areas, which we are truly blessed in this portion of the world, right? So water is important. And another thing, ferns have been around for 360 million years. So that's a long, long time. And flowers came around, as Mary mentioned a little earlier, but the ferns and the plants that don't have seeds, they've been around 200 million years before the plants with the flowers and the seeds. So that's why they rely on spores, because they hadn't evolved to that yet. So I found that kind of cool. So, but before we move on to our natives, let's talk a little bit about some of the nomenclature, learn a little bit about the anatomy of ferns. So the slide on the left, pretty basic. I knew I was going to do that. Pretty basic. You know, you got a frond. Everybody's heard of a fern frond. And that just includes the stem, or sometimes called the petiole. And then you got the blade, which is just the leafy portion of the frond, the plant. And then the pinna, which is just a fancy word for leaf or leaflets, okay? And then a slide on the right-hand side just shows a little bit more. You've got roots, you've got a rhizome, and then this little thing here, the fiddlehead or crozier. you know, then you got your blade, your frond, and then here's the reproductive portion of the plant. It's the spores or the sori, and they're found underneath the leaflets. So it's important to know this kind of stuff, because if you're identifying the different ferns that we have, all of those things are going to be characteristic of the particular species you're looking at, because they have different shapes. They all have sori or spores, but those two can be different shapes. They can be different colors. So, you know, if you're identifying a fern and you're getting down to the sori part, you know, you're really doing well, because, you know, then you're kind of really getting into the weeds. Hopefully you'd be able to identify our natives, just because, you know, these two look drastically different, right? So anyway, but you need to know that that is another way that you can identify the fern. And so here's a slide that just kind of shows the spores. And like I said, they can be different shapes, different colors, different locations, even on the pinna. Sometimes that will help you identify ferns. Okay, so I don't know, in the back, you probably can't read all this verbiage, but don't worry about it. What I'm trying to show you here is that fern leaves have different shapes, and typically they are referred to as pinnate, which is kind of looks like these first four, looks kind of like a feather, pretty simple. You've got a stem or petiole, and then you've got a leaflet that comes out from the side. Great example is our Pacific sword fern or Western sword fern. But then you've got bipinnate, and oh my Lord, there we go. Bipinnate is when you've got a stem, and then you've got maybe another stem that comes off of that, and then there's leaflets off of that. So, you know, it's kind of like a compound leaf. And, you know, if you're talking about trees, you would go into the same type of, you know, nomenclature. So just be aware that there's different ways to identify them. And then, you know, up here, I tried to find a slide that would kind of, you know, show you the difference between bipinnate and tripinnate. So, okay. So these are the 6 that I'm going to touch upon here. And I have arranged the talk. I'm going to start with the licorice fern, which is in the upper left corner, and go across, and then end up with the bracken fern. And it's the wettest habitat is going to be your licorice fern, maidenhair fern, lady fern, deer fern, sword fern, and then the bracken fern, which can really withstand a lot drier conditions. And if you look at clear cuts, south-facing clear cuts, that's what you're going to see is this guy here. Okay. Let's see. Another thing, when I started doing a little research for this, I was kind of under the assumption that the Native American people relied heavily on ferns for a food source, and same thing with wildlife. And come to find out, that's not necessarily true. They used them for a lot of other things, basketry and bedding and things like that, but they didn't eat them a lot because they can be toxic and they can cause carcinogens. So I am not up here to tell you guys to go get a fiddlehead and chew on it, because I don't know enough about ferns, first of all, and I don't think that they taste very good either. So, all right, licorice fern. This is a cool little fern, polypodium. Just means that they have many feet because they send out a rhizome. And then from that rhizome, a single frond will come up. You'll find them in the wettest habitat that we have around here. They'll grow on boulders, near streams, cliffs that have, water seeping out of them. And then you'll see them on the sides of big leaf maple trees that have a lot of moss. And so might be difficult to mimic that in your landscape, but if you already have a big leaf maple and it's got moss on it, you might be successful. So when a plant grows on another plant but it doesn't hurt it, that's called an epiphyte, and that's what this licorice fern is. It's summer deciduous, so you'll see it this time of the year very prevalently, but you may not see it much in the summer because it really, really likes that cold, moist air. And I've got examples of this guy too. And so after, you can come up here and take a peek and see what they look like now. They're about 1 to 2 feet tall. The leaves are once pinnate, pretty simple, much like the sword fern or deer fern that I'm going to talk about. I already talked about landscape. So use by the native people. The rhizomes weren't edible, but they would chew on them because they had a real sweet taste, hence the word licorice. They would use the rhizome in a tea for medicinal purposes to help with colds and soothe sore throats. And again, best way to identify them is, if there's something growing on your maple tree, that's probably this little guy. And the sori or the spores, when you look at them, they're really evident. Not necessarily this time of the year, but they're really evident, and so they're on the underside. But when you look at the front side of the leaf, you'll see them protruding out too. So, but pretty easy to identify just because it's such a wet habitat that I don't think you're gonna need to rely on the sori. This is just a close-up of what it looks like. This is actually a big leaf maple tree. I took the picture. I could have stepped back a bit and then you would have seen that it's actually on a tree, but and then this is a close-up of what the actual frond looks like. Cool little plant. Okay, maidenhair fern. Beautiful, beautiful fern. This too is deciduous, or I'm sorry, the first one wasn't. This one is. It's also called five-finger fern because it kind of puts out, a fan-shaped leaf. Beautiful, delicate, graceful, grows in shady, moist areas, can be on rocks and cliffs, next to streams, maybe the spray from waterfalls, you'll see it. It can tolerate low light, but really does like bright, indirect light. So it'll grow in shade too, but it can handle the sun just indirectly. It's got a real unique stem because the stem is black, and that's where it gets its common name, because the stem's black and it looked like black hairs. 6 inches to 2.5 feet tall. The fronds are palmate pinnate, like I said, and the plant will send up a stipe, and then the frond will kind of be at a right angle from the stipe. The genus name, Adianentum, is a Greek derivation which means unwetted, because the water just kind of washes over it like they're waterproof or something. Used by native people, the stipes were used in basketry design because of their color. The Quinaults would burn the leaves and use the ash to put in their hair to make it shiny and dark. California natives use the stem for pierced earrings, either alone or they might attach a feather or something to them. Put them in their earlobe to keep the hole from closing. And in the landscape, maidenhair ferns are prized by gardeners because they're so beautiful and delicate, but really needs a shady place, plenty of moisture. Might be difficult for you to, mimic that in your landscape. Some people probably have them growing indoors, but good luck. I'm sure all these can be a little challenging for you. Another close-up. Beautiful fern. I love them. Okay, the lady fern. So this is deciduous. As you can see, the pictures behind me show a nice green frond, and then, that I probably took that bottom right picture, I don't know, September, October, so starting to turn, lose its color, and then eventually, it'll turn this color, and then you won't even be able to see it. There's what the spores look like underneath. 1 to 5 feet tall, so it can get quite tall. The natives ate the roots and the rhizomes after roasting and baking in a pit. The leaves were used to cover camas, berry baskets, and to wipe or clean off fish. The sori are elongated and curved, kind of a horseshoe shape. So this is one fern that if you think, oh my gosh, is that a lady fern or is that a bracken fern, you can look underneath, and if they're horse-shaped, they're going to be the lady fern. In the landscape, species is graceful, lacy, yellow-green fronds, very eye-catching. It may, however, be a little too aggressive in your yard, and so you got to be careful about that. But maybe you have an area that's kind of on the fringe of, like I have a yard that's on the, my yard proper, and then I've got forest, and so it would do great there. It does die back completely in the winter, so if you do try to incorporate it into your landscape, it might not look too great this time of the year, and you may have to do a little bit of cleanup. The deer fern. So I like this fern a lot. It's evergreen, although it sends up a stipe, vertical stipe with a frond, but that vertical stipe is deciduous. So if you're walking around the woods and you're like, trying to look for the vertical stipe, this time of the year, it's not going to be there. So I think the fern that you would confuse this one with might be the sword fern. And I'm going to get to the sword fern next and tell you the reasons why you shouldn't get it confused with the sword fern. But this is a huge sword fern, right? I've got deer fern. I do a walk every day, and I've got deer fern on that route, but they're pretty small and kind of low to the ground. They don't have a stipe, so I had to really get down there and take a look at them. I think I brought some samples here, and you can come and compare, because even looking at this one, it's like it could just be a juvenile sword fern. So let's see what else. Used by the people, native people, roots and shoots were cooked and eaten as an emergency food. So I don't think any of this stuff really tastes that good. So, but if you're starving, you might, think otherwise. But the leaves were eaten to prevent thirst, and the fronds were used to line pits. Again, food preparation, bedding, things like that. The leaves were used medicinally on skin sores, which is said to be learned by the native people after they watched deer rubbing their little antler nubs on the deer fern. So they thought maybe it was, because they were, they itched or hurt, and so then the native people would use it to help them if they had sores on their skin. So maybe that's how they got their name, though, from watching the deer. So in the landscape, it is one of the better ones for your landscape because it's evergreen, and the fronds are really pretty, I think. Adding those vertical stipes adds a little bit of texture to your yard, and it doesn't need that really, really wet spray from the waterfall or the creeks or anything. So it can handle a little bit of dryness, and it's the best for your landscapes, second only to the sword fern. Okay, can adapt to many situations. And the fronds, even on the evergreens, they will turn brown and die, not all at once, like the deciduous ferns will, but they start kind of giving up or surrendering after a couple years. So go ahead and just cut them back. Not a big deal to just cut them back, and it won't hurt the plant, and it'll be a lot nicer to look at. All right, sword fern. Really easy to identify. I don't know if the pictures do it justice or not, but they have this little lobular thing at the base of the stem that resembles, this protective thing on a sword. So I remember as a kid, I grew up in the Northern California. Sword fern's very prevalent there too. And I don't know, I was probably on some sort of a little biology walk or something like that. And that's what the instructor, told us on how to identify the ferns. So maybe you all know that, maybe you don't, but super, super easy. And if it's new to you, please come up after and take a look. This shows it very, very well. Let's see. So you notice the the other thing that I should have said earlier when I was talking about the different shapes of the leaves, some of them are triangular, really broad base, pointy at the tip. Some are pointy at the tip and pointy at the base, and they're wider in the middle. So they're oblong or elliptical. So you just need to be kind of paying attention to that kind of stuff when you're trying to identify your ferns. I kind of liken it to people that are birders. I'm not a birder, but I love birds, and I'm always intrigued by, trying to figure out what something is, and then I figure it out, and then I forget. And, but like there's two egrets that are white. We've got a snowy egret, and we've got a common egret, and if you're just dying to know which one it is, you have to pay further attention to some of the other features of the bird, not just the color and not just the size. And the same thing goes with ferns. They don't all have the same shaped leaf, and so you just got to keep narrowing it down to something, and it'll help you when you're trying to key it out. So with the egrets, though, one has a yellow bill, the other one has a black bill. One has yellow feet, one has black feet. So you just got to pay attention to some of the nuances. Western sword fern, the deer and the elk and the black bear will browse on this stuff, but they don't really like it because they know that some ferns are toxic, and it doesn't provide a lot of nutritional value. So that's what I've read. It is the most widespread and versatile of all of our native ferns. Although it's very at home in our woodlands. You can bring it into your landscape, and it'll do really well. I've got one in my back patio, my backyard, and it's in a very shady spot, kind of north facing, and it gets a little unruly or unsightly. I just cut it back and comes back great. So, all right. Last fern, bracken fern. That's what this guy is here. Okay. So it's found in the driest conditions. So, you know, if you wanted to bring it into your landscape, if you've got a sunny yard, it would probably do okay. The leaves are widest at the base and then, you know, pointy at the top, so triangular in shape. Great example of tripinnate, because you've got one stem, two stems, and then stems coming off of that. Okay. Can be quite tall, 2 to 5, 6 feet. You have to be kind of careful with this one because it also can be kind of aggressive, and the fronds have what's called an allelopathic effect on germination of other seed. So it's just a biochemical phenomenon that can inhibit the growth of other plants, and very toxic to wildlife, humans. The seed is really, really light and can travel across continents and even oceans. So it is the world's most widespread fern. And it will take over your yard. I've heard though that it can be burnt and ground up, and the ash can be used as a fertilizer because it's really high in potassium. But because it's also got that allelopathic property, you're not going to have much else that's coming up. So I don't even know why in that literature that I read, use it as a fertilizer, unless you're trying to grow more bracken fern, I guess. I don't know. So really pretty. So this is exactly what it looks like this time of the year. Okay, brown because it's deciduous, but mostly when I go on my walks around here, I see this guy and this guy, but they're pretty easy. They're pretty, you know, in your face. The rest of them are a little bit, you know, kind of hidden. You got to kind of poke around and look for them. So what's best for your yard or landscape? Well, kind of depends on, you know, whether you've got droughty area or wet area. Would maybe direct you as to which fern you're going to put in there. And, you know, you can bring it indoors. I'm not a huge indoor plant person, as Carol knows, because she took care of one of my plants for me when I was not doing too well in that. So, you know, some will die back, some won't, just like any other plant, you know. Do you want a deciduous plant in your yard and put other things there, or do you want something that's there all year round? So, okay. So last week, there was a master gardener that presented on propagation. So I'm not going to talk 30 seconds on propagation, but I thought that maybe some people in the audience might be interested in knowing if these ferns can be propagated, and the answer is yes. There's probably some real master gardeners that have done it from spores. I'm not one of them. You can do it from cuttings. And then last week, Ginny brought in a sword fern with its roots and rhizomes, and she divided it, and they're pretty hardy, sword fern are, so I know you can do that. But, you know, if you're interested in propagating ferns, that's part of the research that you can go do and find out for yourself. So good luck.